Buenos dias. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. And before introducing the panel and outlining a little bit the topic of today's conversation, I wanted to ask you all to give a very, very warm welcome to Elena Foster, to Staffan Ahrenberg, to Céline Fribourg, and to Santiago Fernández de Caleya. And many, many thanks to Elena for the invitation to chair this panel here today. And I think the topic is an urgent one and a very important one for the 21st century, the topic of the artist book. For me personally, from the very beginning, when I was like 16, 17 years old, I started to visit artists as a teenager. I remember one of the first visits was on the boat of Lawrence Wiener in Amsterdam, on his houseboat, and he explained to me that books are as important as exhibitions. And we spent a lot of time looking at his artist books. I subsequently also had a similar conversation with Christian Boltanski and Annette Messager, whom I visited in Malakoff the same year, and they explained to me also that, when artists do books, that is as important as an exhibition. So for me, always this idea in terms of curating of books, being equal to exhibitions is very important. And it's important that today still, when we visit museums and we look at collections, there is still not a very strong presence of books, in terms of visibility, still bigger presence of painting and video and sculpture. And I think it's a time where we just need to more and more create visibility, for artist books. And it was an interesting moment when in the presentation of Christoph Scherex and Kathy Halbreich, it was a recent MoMA presentation a couple of years ago, they put Yoko Ono's Grapefruit book in the very center of a collection presentation, to say that great book Yoko Ono did in the 60s, which is a book which is only made of instructions. So whoever wants to do the exhibition can just do it, by executing these instructions in the book. And the book was designed by her and is the work. And that book was presented in this collection exhibition, alongside paintings and sculptures as one of the key works, of the second half of the 20th century. For me, in terms of, my own practice as a curator, the first artist book I was involved with was actually a book with Gerhard Richter. One of my first exhibitions happened in the Nietzsche house in Sils Maria, and I'm telling the story because it's very connected to Elena and to Ivorypress. And so we did this exhibition in the Nietzsche house, where basically Nietzsche wrote Zarathustra. It's this magical place, the Engadin, in the Swiss mountains. It's almost on 2,000 meters altitude, and of course Elena and Norman Foster are so involved in having created awareness for the Engadin and putting the Engadin on the map as one of the most magical locations, in the world, where the light of the north and the light of the south meet. It's basically Italy meets Scandinavia. It's this strange oxymoron, of a northern and a southern light, which has attracted artists over the years and has attracted Gerhard Richter to spend a lot of time there and to photograph and paint the mountains. So we did an exhibition of him in the Nietzsche house, inserting his photographs. And I told him, it was in 92, and I was still a student, and I said, we should basically do a book. And he explained to me, we shouldn't just do a catalog or a book, but that he actually wanted to design it. He said, we don't need a designer. He said, I really, want to do it myself. And he started to make this amazing layout, which Ivorypress with Elena actually republished a couple of years ago in a revised, different edition with Walter Koenig. And he made a layout, and it was magical because, certain pages were empty, certain images were upside down, and it was clear that he made a collage. It was an artwork, in a printed form. So for me, that, happening with one of the first exhibitions was a really key experience of the, importance of artist book. And so it's magical that today we have four of the great publishers of 21st century, late 20th and early 21st century artist books here with us. And it will be fascinating to hear their vision. And I thought maybe in terms of the protocol of today's panel, that it could be nice that we start with four statements, four manifestos, where the four publishers present will tell us about their idea of artist books, why artist books are important, maybe also the definition of an artist book. That's a very difficult question, what is an artist book? And not everybody, agrees on that. We're also going to discuss unrealized artist books, what are utopic books which haven't been realized, because I always remember James Lee Byers, and we discussed him last night with Marina Abramovic. We're so delighted that Marina is here today, and Marina and I had a long conversation about James Lee Byers, and of course James Lee Byers always wanted to do the perfect object, the perfect book. So once when he had an exhibition, actually very often in museums, he told the museum that it should be a golden book, and this perfect book was of course unaffordable. So it had to remain unrealized. And in one case, actually, he was so obsessed to make the book happen that he locked in the museum director into her office and said, I'm only going to open the office if you agree to do this book. So it was an incident which happened in Paris. And anyway, this idea of unrealized books, utopic books, will be also topic of the conversation. We're going to start, of course, everything starts with Elena, and Elena, of course, needs no introduction as the host and the founder and CEO of Ivorypress. And Elena is a publisher and a curator and founded Ivorypress in 1996. And in this space here, so many amazing things have happened about books, and not only presentation of the amazing books Elena is publishing, but also lots of other books in terms of an archive of books. And the many parallel realities of Elena's work is that she is also involved as a patron in museums and foundations all over the world. Is chair of the council of our Serpentine Galleries in London. And one thing which is very important to mention is that Elena has written many years ago an extraordinary book on salons, and basically the importance of salons, of bringing all the disciplines together. And not only has she written a book, but she has practiced, salons on a very, very regular basis. So please give a very, very warm welcome to Elena Foster, who will give her manifesto.
Thank you, Hans. Thank you for being here, and also Hans and I, we are companions through many, many years. We have had salons together in the middle of the Engadine, the 2nd of January, and we have love and passion for books, and we were talking before here what we are going to do with our libraries, because we have it all over the place and everywhere. For me, an artist book has not a definition. It's where the artists decide what the artist book is. And that is the motto that Ivorypress have had since 1996. I approached the artist and I said, I want to do a book with you, but a book that goes beyond your dreams. You have unlimited time, unlimited resources. The only thing I want is that this book is the holistic approach that you have to your creation. Can have images, you can use words, you can use paper, iron, you can use all kind of materials that you wish, but at the end I want that you feel completely satisfied that this is the artist book of your life. Is how I approach Chillida, who was my first book, and how I approached my last book, that was with William Kendridge, that we worked for 5 years on it. The materials that I see in artist books has been not only paper, but also bronze, brass, all kind, glass. For instance, the Bible of glass of Olafur. Olafur told me, Elena, I want to do my book. My book is about glass, which is the material I love more. So I will work directly with the glass, and I will create 9 editions, each unique, with the different glass and shapes. However, I was telling Hans before that for me, my point of reference and my base to have this approach with Ivorypress has been Duchamp. For me, has been, and it is, my source of inspiration. the way how he approached his books using all kind of materials and formats is the definition what an object is. What is, although, as you say, Francis Bacon said that the book is the object that you can smell, touch, digest, and to go with you even in the dreams. In fact, the muse of Francis, when I have the privilege to work for 4 years in his home, when he passed away, his bedroom was surrounded by books, but not books that you can imagine as books, but from catalogs, from dermatological illness to the Book of Monkeys. And all of them were rewritten and painted in his side tables. So I don't talk more, but I will come back to the beginning. An artist's book has not a universal definition. It's a very personal definition, and each of the artists has to define what for him or her is an artist's book before he begin or she begin to do it.
Thank you so much.
But we will, no, don't clap, because we are going to talk a lot.
Definitely a big applause for Elena. And I'm so glad you mentioned the Olafur Eliasson book, this extraordinary book made out of glass, because when I curated a show of Olafur last year, concerning actually all the works he did with glass, it was very clear that this was one of his key works, he had created. And it's very much to do also with what Anthony Powell once said when he said, books furnish a room and they can actually, enter space. And that, of course, leads us to our next speaker, to Staffan Ahrenberg. It all started with a space because Staffan, who actually grew up in Switzerland, is a Swedish film producer, art collector, had an epiphany. Very often great things happen when we go on a walk. No? We should never underestimate the importance of being flaneurs. And that's as important in the 21st century as it's ever been before. And Lucius Burckhardt, the Swiss scholar and sociologist, he founded an entire science based on this idea of us going on a walk. He called it strollology, to go on a stroll. And he actually managed to make this a discipline in the Kassel University. He was professor of strollology. And it was on a stroll in Saint-Germain that Staffan all of a sudden encountered this extraordinary dormant publishing house of Cahiers and had the epiphany of actually reawaken it and bring it back to life. But he's now going to tell us the story. A very warm welcome to Staffan Ahrenberg.
Thank you. I tell you quickly the story how I encountered this, because it sounds almost like it's not true. I was literally on the stroll on a street where I walk often in Paris, and I had never seen the Cahiers d'Art in a physical space. I didn't know that, since I knew it didn't publish anything for over 40 years. This was in 2010, by the way. And Cahiers d'Art is a very famous French art publishing house with a gallery in Paris that was founded in 1926 by an eminent Greek art historian called Christian Zervos. And Zervos was a remarkable man who did one can call it a magazine, it's not really a magazine, they call it a revue, that he published from 1926 till 1960 with really the most important artists and poets and writers of its time, but also he was probably the first to really work between archaeological art, primitive art, found art, objects, etc. He did an incredible issue, 1936, with Duchamp, just dedicated to the object, ready-made, found objects, etc. So this publishing house he also did the Picasso catalog, the famous 34-volume, 100-kilo Bible of Picasso today, which is 16,000 images, which took 46 years to make between him and Picasso. And this publishing house...
That you have re-edit now.
Which I have republished, but I will tell you that in 1 second. And the thing is that I walk on the street and I suddenly see this little gallery boutique with a beautiful faded awning with the Cahiers letters, and I truly did not understand why it was there, because they don't publish for so long. And I had a moment, so I walked in just by curiosity to ask them basically why they're there. And I changed my question. I walked in and I said, there was a man there, and I said, Monsieur, excuse me, but who owns Cahiers today? And the guy said, my brother. And I said, would your brother sell it? I don't know where that question came from, because I had no intention, no knowledge, no idea, so that's the epiphany that Hans is making reference to. And the guy said, I don't know, you would have to ask my brother. The brother wasn't there. So I left my business card, and I said, ask your brother to call me. And I walked out. And 10 minutes later, I'd forgotten about it. For me, it was unrealistic that he would call me. The next day, the brother calls, and he says, I think we ought to meet. He has a bit of old French. And I went back the following day and met him, and Cahiers has 2 floors. I hope you all come and visit in Paris, and you will see it. It's quite a beautiful place. And I got the privilege of walking up the little stairs to the 2nd floor, which was this book salon, absolutely wonderful, with half-moon windows on this street in Saint-Germain. And as I came up, I had 1 foot on the last step and 1 foot on the floor. The guy did not say hello to me. He didn't say bonjour, monsieur, which seems to be the way in Paris. He said, you arrive at the right time. I was thinking of selling. So it's totally extraordinary. And I said, great, I'll buy it. What do you have? And then we sat for 2 hours and we had this conversation. And I understood that these 2 brothers were the sons of the secretary or manager of Christian Zervos since the end of World War II until past his death. And they had managed to buy this place. And they had kept it alive, but they had not published anything for 40 years, which was sort of rare and very rare, and stumbled on sort of Sleeping Beauty there. And that's when I acquired it, and then I got 2 eminent Swiss friends of mine involved. One is Sam Keller and Hans Ulrich Obrist, and together with them a great person that you probably all know here from Madrid, Isabella Mora, and together we have relaunched it and recreated the publishing house, and the first new issue in 52 years came out in 2012 with Ellsworth Kelly. And to wrap up this presentation, I will tell you how we all felt that Ellsworth Kelly, who had lived in Paris, could have been a Zervos artist in 1961. But he was 89 years old and in 2012. And I didn't know him, but Sam Keller knew him, and he called him. I remember we were on the streets in Istanbul at the Istanbul Biennale, and we called Ellsworth, and Sam told him that I had bought this publishing house and we wanted to restart it with him. And his answer was, oh, Cahiers d'Or. He said, I was there in 1947. I couldn't even afford to buy one of those things. Now I have some. Of course. And this is how it started. So this is how it was relaunched.
Staffan, thank you so much. This idea of a dialogue with Ellsworth Kelly and this intense dialogue with him, which of course was the relaunch, but also he designed an amazing cover of the issue, was involved in all aspects, leads us straight away to Céline Fribourg, because of course in Celine's publishing initiative it always is as well very connected to the artist, as it is in Elena's case, this idea that it all grows out of very long-term dialogues, can reach 5 years. No, the idea also that books are slow. I think it's very important, the idea of reintroducing slowness in a very fast-paced environment. So Céline, in a way, reading your CV this morning, I thought really all roads lead to book. It was sort of like a destiny that you would do books, and it's actually since 95 that Céline started Éditions Coromandel with artist books, and that then led to the Éditions Take5, which is the publishing house now, publishing original works by renowned contemporary artists, writers, designers, also bringing different practitioners together. And actually, it reminded me of a conversation I once had with the late Alain Rob Grillet, one of the pioneers of the Nouveau Roman. And I went to see him in Paris in the 90s and said, I was very interested in this dialogue between art and literature. And Rob Grillet went to his study and got a book, put it on the table and said, I have to show you this book. And it was a very, very big book in a very limited edition, similar to the books Elena was describing, these very small editions of artist books he had done with Robert Rauschenberg, because Rauschenberg was very obsessed and actually invited Rob Grillet to the United States to write on him. And Rob Grillet told me he was waiting for him. He wouldn't travel by plane because he was involved in an airplane crash, so he was scared of flying. So he arrived by boat in New York. Rauschenberg would wait for him. Boat arrived, and they would work on this amazing book where Rob Grillet would handwrite and Rauschenberg would make lithographs. And so at the end of the meeting, I said to Alain Rob Grillet, but who are novelists of our time who make that bridge, to art? And he didn't hesitate a second. He said, you need to meet my pupil. You need to meet Jean-Philippe Toussaint. And that, of course, leads us to Céline, because Céline did this amazing book with Jean-Philippe Toussaint and Annette Messager. Please give a very, very warm welcome to Céline Fribourg.
Thank you, Hans Ulrich, and thank you, Elena, for inviting us. I think, like you said, the artist book matter is really serious and important today, and it's wonderful that we can expose all our perspective and ideas today. To come back to your idea of defining an artist book, for me, I'm really ashamed to say that I wouldn't be able to define an artist book, because for me, first of all, it's a universe in itself that entices alchemy between different participants coming from very different walks of life, and also entices serendipity. Serendipity being the faculty of making unexpected and very happy discoveries, but by accident. And it's not a real accident, because it's an accident that is based on intuition, that is based on knowledge. And I think the medium of the book is really keen on favorizing this kind of it's like a chemical reaction, actually. And the medium of the book forces us to sit down, to take time, to mature things, to think about things. It's not something today we're bombarded with images, we're bombarded with art in many, many forms. And with the book, there's no cheating. You have to spend time, you have to talk about it. That's why many times artists love books and they give their life for books. They're surrounded by books. And so the book is really important.
And can you maybe tell us about some of your books? I mean, we mentioned Annette Messager and Toussaint. It could be great to hear about some of the
actually my idea when I created this publishing venture, we were 3 friends at the beginning, and we were spending all our evenings to imagine new books every time and to see which book we would like to see created. And one day we said, okay, enough, let's start. And we started by publishing 3 books, and our idea was to associate writers and artists coming from very, very different backgrounds, different culture, different religion, but that shared a common sensibility, and try as much as possible to create fruitful collaboration, but also a shock caused by the ambiguity, the relationship between photography, words, and then graphic design, and also design, because we collaborated also with designers like Ettore Sozzas, Michele De Lucchi. And this collaboration makes mini universe where it's not only an object, the tray case of the book created by the designer appears as the skin of the book. So it's really like a being that has its own life, and each work keeps its own integrity, but at the same time there are some connections that create between the works of each participant that creates an emotion and a reflection. So
and can you maybe give us one or two examples of books particularly dear to you?
So I published a book with Ernesto Neto, which took 3 years to accomplish. And at the beginning, we started to think, and I wanted to associate Ernesto with a neurologist because I wanted to study the dermatological aspect of his work, and really the fact that the material aspect and the fact that you get into his work was very interesting. And by talking and spending a lot of time with Ernesto, he realized that he had never explored the relationship between the viewer and his work, which is very important in the tradition of Brazilian art. And so he photographed this woman for 24 hours, every, I think, 10 minutes. And she became, at the same time, the muse, the inspiring muse, and she was eaten by his installation, which was at the Toyota Museum in Tokyo, which became this big Leviathan where she... And then Tom McCarthy, who is a writer, a British writer that you know well, and wrote this text, which is a fiction text about this person that goes to his psychiatrist and wants to study how the brain function with the desire of this woman that is swallowed by this work. So it's a metaphor for desire, and it's a metaphor for this relationship between a man and a woman. And they liked working so much together that when Ernesto Neto had his retrospective in the Tate Gallery, he asked Tom McCarthy to write the preface of the catalogue. So,
Céline, thank you so much. It's now my immense pleasure to introduce Santiago Fernández de Caleya, who actually started as an investment banker and also a film producer like Staffan. You both have a background in film producing. Santiago founded the Morena Films and then actually became publishing director, general director of Turner Publishing. What is interesting is that in the case studies we've heard so far of Elena, of Staffan and Selene, it's of course the artist book at the center. In the case of Santiago, it's a publishing house which has published 3,000 titles, so it's a lot of different titles which are not artist books, but artist books do play a role within that. So we're going to hear more about that. A very, very warm welcome to Santiago Fernández de Caleya.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Elena, for having me here and participate with this wonderful set of publishers. Thank you very much, Hans. First of all, I reckon I should give a very brief account of what Turner is. Turner started off as a bookstore in Madrid. It was the only English language bookstore in Madrid, in the center. And we had a strange business model. Apart from selling English language books, we actually sold a lot of the books censored by the Franco regime. It was actually started in December 1970. Right from the beginning, we started publishing all kind of mostly poetry based in Spanish authors and also Latin American poets. We did a lot of non-fiction and also what you would call the novela negra española, which is actually very customary of Spain. The history of Turner has been always a constant change and transformation within the publishing industry. And we actually started publishing artist books, and we can go into defining an artist book in a little while. But we started publishing artist books right in the early 1970s as well. And a lot of them were actually illustrated books that there was an existing text, and we actually commissioned artists to illustrate those books. Just to mention a few, The Arte de Vivir Loque of José Bergamín with Saura as illustrator, or The Odyssey, The Iliad, that were illustrated by Carlos Franco and Pérez Villalta. As from then, we actually developed a lot of different businesses within the trade world, and also we continued our line of business in the art books market with, for instance, one of the latest would be the Buenos Aires tour by an Argentinian artist called Jorge Maki. The company today is actually divided into several sections. One of them is non-fiction trade publishing, also art publishing within the trade sector, and occasionally we do livre d'artiste, which, as all my colleagues have mentioned, are very long-term projects. And I would like to actually take a word that Selene has mentioned about serendipity, which is practically the reason I'm actually here with you today. I mean, I had no original idea about coming into the publishing world. It was actually due to a Mexican singer that I actually came involved in this world, where I've been for the last 20 years. With regards to the definition of an artist book, I think I would agree again with Celine that an artist book is actually something that it's a team that develops between a collaboration of a publisher or an editor, an artist always in the center, and possibly designer, possibly writers. It's actually a very distinctive case. It's a very case-by-case scenario. And it really works in a completely different manner. There are no no projects that are identical, and it's really a universe of its own. Every single book is very, very particular, highly personal, extremely personal. So it is a unique experience in its own way. Every single book is completely different. There are no shapes, no forms, no materials, as Elena was mentioning. There are no formats. It can be bound, it can be unbound, it can be paper, it can be plastic, it can be crystal, it can be glass, it can be absolutely anything that the artist will feel comfortable in actually sort of portraying an idea. And sometimes the publisher's influence is actually very distant from the artist in a way, and with a lot of psychology. No, I think that's a key element of being behind the artist and supporting and nurturing throughout that process. So,
and can you maybe give us one example of an artist book you worked with, like a case study, particularly dear to you?
I think the most particular case was actually the book I mentioned, which was the Buenos Aires tour with Jorge Maki. Was a very complex book because it was actually, everything was actually designed, developed, the idea, the concept by Jorge Maki. But then he had a joint collaboration with a poet, Maria Negroni, and also with a musician. And it was actually a very complex project because he was trying to build a hypothetical underground network in Buenos Aires. He actually took a map of Buenos Aires, put a glass on top of it, broke the glass, and that actually drew lines which then became like a subway map. And it was absolutely fantastic and fascinating, trying to discover in each one of these sort of stops that were drawn by that broken glass on top of the Buenos Aires map. And each corner was meant to be a subway stop, and it was trying to record sounds that were very particular to that same corner, or maybe a photograph in one particular corner. There were actually, in a particular corner, there were actually 4 crosses on each one of the intersections. So that was actually very, very interesting, very weird, very nurturing. And as I said, it's such an enjoyable process, sometimes very frustrating, but I shouldn't be saying that.
Don't you think you are talking about intuition and serendipity, but my experience is that, of course, the artist has to have intuition. We are here to talk about the role of the publisher. The role of the publisher in the artist books. The first is seduction. You have to seduce the artist to take the enterprise of being for years, focusing the book. The second is determination. Is that you see that you want to arrive here. You don't know where you are going to arrive, so you have to support uncertainty. You have to live with them, with uncertain, because you don't know if it's going to happen or it's not going to happen. It's like love. Huh? It's there, and you have to nurture all the time. So the publisher constantly is seducing, is pursuing, and has to have the vision where they have to go. And also another role of the publisher is flexibility, because you do a prototype, you do another prototype. Oh, I want it in cement, in concrete. No, I want it in gold, or I want it in paper, or I want it in papier-mâché, or in wood, or in brass. And that means time, artisans, and a lot of financial risk.
Absolutely.
And you arrive, and the artist who is the creator said no. With Chillida, we did 26 prototypes. This is the first. With the last, with William Kendridge, we visit Dresden, Paris, London, California, New York, to find only the printer who really was able to do the perfect strategy and know the technology to come back to medieval times and be able to print in 3 dimensions. And some of them, they were really good. In fact, in London was very good, but William very wisely said no. Has not exactly the millimeter of the density of the black. So we have to find another one. So
that's the frustration of, there are too many artists here, so we can't, we can't give away the secret. Elena, please.
What is the role of the publisher? First, to seduce. Sometimes in my career, I couldn't seduce one, just Lucian Freud. I spent a lot of time with him, having coffee, tea, lunch, dinner, writing me letters. And then told me, no, I don't do artist books. I do canvas. But it cost me like 2 years to try to seduce. So this is the first.
So that's unrealized.
Yeah, it's the unrealized, completely unrealized. But you have to, be completely open, flexible, support the unexpected, and to be able to risk your time and also the financial resources of your company, and also to accept sometimes issues that you, as a publisher, you will not do it, but you have to, and you have to be persistent to convince that that is not. And you let me just the last one, who happened with Tony Caro. Tony Caro, yes, I'm going to do it, but you leave me to present it, a fantastic prototype. So he spent 1 year doing a box with every one of the sculptures that he had created all his life. Little like the one of Chamberlain, the little ones in a box. But it was a catalog, really. So as a publisher, there were nothing new except to have in a box the compendium of all the work of Tony Caro. So to convince Tony to explore another possibility and arrive to the concept that he arrived to be a library, the book as a library, that, by the way, in this moment is going to be built as a building, to keep his work, and also to have a library. So from up there, he will be very happy, because it was his vision, that the book will be the prototype for a building of a library, for his work and for books. So to go through all kind of, you have to be extremely patient and also to be, and the last role of the I would say skill that has to be constantly injecting oil is curiosity to find new artisans, new people, new ways to do something unheard, like the engineering system that Tony Caro wanted for his library, for his book, that they said, no, the book has to open and stay in every level. You know, you have to hide the engine inside, but at that time it was impossible to do. So we have to go to Germany, to car companies, to aeroplane companies, to find how to make the engine that support the open, it's called open secret, the open book, with brass, with bronze. You have it here so you can see it, so you can open it. So because if you open and close, can cut your hand. So you have to be also insurance.
But I love these stories, Elena, because also it shows that very often, you know, you start somewhere, it's a journey, and then you could come to somewhere totally else.
Yeah.
And here that all of a sudden you start with a book, and it could be a building. It's a great story. And your great story makes me anticipate the question I wanted to ask at the end. I wanted to ask you all to tell us more about your unrealized books, because in a way we know a lot about unrealized projects of architects because they publish them, and very often through that publishing of the unrealized they're then getting built, but we know very little about artists' unrealized projects, and we know even less about artists' unrealized books. And so I wanted to ask you to maybe tell us a little bit about some of your unrealized books. And there can be lots of different reasons, of course, why a book is unrealized, why a project is unrealized. It can be too big to be realized, it can be too expensive to be realized. Sometimes a project can also be too small to be realized. You know, Silvio Meirelles has these unrealized projects which were too tiny, so no one ever wanted to do them. So too small to be realized. And then, of course, as you know, Doris Lessing once told me, there is also the project one didn't dare to do. No, it's not only censorship, but also self-censorship. There can be many reasons why a project is unrealized. So I wanted to ask you all. Elena already told us great stories,
There
but I'm
are
sure
more,
there are
but
more. So we're going to hear more from Elena, and we're going to hear from all of you about your unrealized, unbuilt books.
Well,
And these are homage to James Lee Byers, because I told the story before, but I didn't tell it to you fully. I need to tell you the story fully because it's very funny. So James Lee Byers had an exhibition at the Musée d'Art Moderne de la Ville de Paris, and the director, I used to work there in the 90s, the director, Suzanne Paget, actually had invited him to do the show, and he was very happy with the show, but he wanted to do this perfect object. And the idea, Marina spoke last night about this beautiful cube, the white, an object like a book like a cube, but he wanted to do that in gold, and that would have cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. So obviously, Suzanne explained to him that the museum cannot do this book. So he saw the key in her door, and one evening locked her into the office and ran away with the key. So I think it took many, many hours for her to be liberated, and the book still remains unrealized. So that's James Lee Byers, but we want to hear your stories.
Well, for me, there are three kinds of unrealized books. The kind that, like Elena says, don't get realized because the artist has a health issue, and that happens to me with James Turrell, for example. But then it's not really an unrealized book because you ever have the hope, I think, throughout your life to realize it one day. Like you said, you have to have determination and faith, and if it's really a project that is strong, dear to your heart, it might realize someday. Then there's the unrealized project because it takes so long. For example, now I'm working on a book with Roberto Cuoghi, and Roberto decided to make a book on lightness, which is a very abstract concept. So he's been researching for now 4 months with NASA on new materials. And so I think this could take, because they're very hard, because they're so light, they're very hard to manipulate. So it could take many years more to come, I think, to find the right material. And then there's the unrealized project that for me is the key of our adventure and passion, is that it's what motivates us, is the core of our publishing venture, and that's why when you ask me what is my favorite ever books or what is the book that I would like to realize, for me it's the unpublished book, because it's like a flame that is always burning and it's like a passion. And I think if I didn't have any unrealized book in my heart, in my soul, then I would, a part of me would die. So it's a very strong conviction.
Stephane, you're unrealized.
I think there are many books, of course, that are part of that. But in our case, I think the one that comes to mind is to one day have a complete catalog raisonné of Picasso. That is the unrealized project, or maybe the unrealizable project.
Santiago?
I reckon the most frustrating project I have ever had was a book that we started discussions about close to 12 years ago with Francisco Toledo, a Mexican artist, and who's actually probably one of the largest art book collectors in Latin America. He's got an enormous library and he's extremely fond of books, but he doesn't feel his time has arrived. It's quite interesting because he's over 80, and he has been surrounded by books. He has actually published some trade books which could be talking about the difficulty of the definition of an artist book. That could be the case. I mean, he's got several books called Cuadernos de la Mierda, which are actually could be considered artist books, although they're not actually either on a serial basis, signed or numbered. But that's probably my most frustrating book. Apart from that, we had another project quite a long time ago with a Spanish artist, with Juan Uslet. It must have been over 10 years ago. It was actually a joint collaboration between a Spanish writer called Eduardo Lago and Juan, and it was actually about the Iraq War, the first Iraq War, the US invasion. And that project never actually came to a book form, and it was actually possibly because the time actually went by and we just didn't find the slot to publish it, which was very frustrating indeed.
And there's also Tunga, right?
Well, Tunga is not. I think it will come out. Tunga is a book that we started over 12 years ago again. Tunga died 2 years ago, and the book is actually on its way. It's been edited by Catherine Lampert, and she's been working for, as I said, over 12 years. And again, there were accidents in the middle, but I think that book will come out, hopefully next year.
But it's
well,
great.
This
we go here from 5 years to 12 years. It's very much, you know, Fernand Braudel comes to my mind in relation to artist book. You know, the great historian, he talked about la longue durée. It's about long duration in the making, but also these books are going to be around for a long time. Elena, can you tell us more about your unrealized books? Some more examples.
I have many in my mind to do, and also many books that I would like to do. But I want to come back to 1994, when I radically, like you changed your career. And curiously, one of my mentors was a banker, bought one of the best publishing house limited edition books, as you know, for $1. And he did, and we have here in our collection we have all the books that he did with Balthus, with Motherwell, with many extraordinary. But with him, I learned what afterwards I explore with the books of Bollard, Kahnweiler, Esquira, Meg, that it was combining the artist's drawing, the artist's acting, with the writings. When in 1995 I decided, no, I'm going to be a publisher, and I was pushed by Bob Sansbury, who told me, you have to do a completely different books that all the historians and the publishers and the artists have done until now. And you have to always, as said Celine, have many projects in your mind. He was a supermarket man. He created the Salisbury supermarket, but his passion were books. And he was also the patron and discoverer of Francis Bacon, Giacometti, Moore, and my husband Norman was the first project for him. And he told me something that was always in my mind and still is. I said, you have to have many unrealized projects. You have to always look for more and for more materials, different materials. In the beginning, I began with Chillida, and that was the approach to Chillida. And Chillida had done before many artist books. But in this case, he wanted to do something different with different materials, and that was the reflection book that we did. From 1995, 1996 until now, as I said before, the one approach and 4 years of endless conversation with Lucian Freud, and having already the book in our minds, he decided not to do it. The only thing that came to me, as you said, is dead, but could be alive again. But meanwhile, came to me another unrealized project, that some of them, like do a book in glass that has been there. I have now the idea to do a book on ceramics. And it's a book that we are exploring with Edmund de Waal, and is a book that will put together words, writing, poetry, papers from all over the world, all anew. As he said to us, I want a book that is monumental, that is medieval, that even cannot enter through that. I said, well, you go to Ansel Kiefer with the constellation and say, no, but porcelain. And I will write over. Well, but in this moment, with my team, with Valerie and Claire and all the group of Ivorypress, with the team of Edmund, and Edmund and myself to the front, we are traveling all over, trying to find big pieces of different materials, and making also, because it has to be made, the paper from different cultures that have to be with a core that I cannot explain now here of that book. That is an unrealized, hopeful, could be next year or in 2 or 5 years. We are being very persistent and determined that every day we work something to make it realized. But if you tell me what is your major unrealized project, is the book with Edmund de Waal, and I hope also with Marina Abramovic, because now he's here, so he can begin to think in an interesting artist book.
And then there are, of course, the artists who never do books, and your Lucian Freud example is interesting. And I had this encounter with Emilia.
I think Lucian didn't do it. I have to say now that Lucian and Francis are not with us, and is very well known that Lucian was a little bit jealous that Francis arrived before. So I think the jealousy between them, in the case of Lucian, was much more deeper and much more full of certain, not anger, but revenge. Yeah. I think has a lot to be with the no realized project.
And then, of course, there are artists who in principle never want books because they don't want to be frozen in that sense on the page. And the key example for that is certainly Emilio Prini, the great arte povera artist from Italy. He only did one book in his life, which the Strasbourg Museum published, and I once went to see him and had bought the book, and when he saw that I had the book, he took the book and he ripped out about 2/3 of the pages, because he says it's all wrong, and he corrected the remaining third of the pages. I still have the book, it's the corrected version. And then at some point he said, actually, I did this exhibition, and maybe for the first time in my life I now want to do a catalog. It was a show in Torino, and I wanted to do the interview, and I'm going to design a book. So I already thought this is awkward, because he's not done books for 50 years. But anyway, I went to Rome and did the interview. So we transcribed it, and he said, no, this was only the proof. Now we're going to do the real interview. And back to Rome, did the interview, and he again said, it's the proof, it's not the interview, and the third attempt. And after the third attempt, he said, we should stop this interview, but you should write the text based on the interview. So I wrote the text, 2,000 words, and then the publisher came back to me weeks later and said, we've got a very big problem. Mr. Prini doesn't like the text, because he cannot bear to have something positive written on him, and the text is positive. So, and also he doesn't want to have images, he doesn't want to do the artist book anymore. He changed his mind, but he agreed to edit your text. So I said, great, flexibility, as Elena said. I said, great. So he edited my text from 2,000 words down to 96 words, and he basically made a poem out of it, and he said, it's no longer going to be a book, it's a poster. So the publisher printed a very big poster, which Prini designed, and I explained to him, this is no longer really my text, so there needs to be a co-authorship. So it said Emilio Prini, Hans Ulrich Obrist, as a co-author piece. It was a big poster. But then he told the publisher, I changed my mind. I don't want to have 1,000 posters. We have to destroy them. I only want 10 posters in the world. And I think that was the end of the story. So there are 10 posters. And obviously a similar artist in Spain is the great Vacasel Medina. Isabella Moore and I once went to see him to invite him to a Biennale. And he said, Biennale, not me. Not me. And then exhibitions, not me. And you of course,
book here,
and you convinced him, Elena, to do a book. I want to hear this story. Can you tell us about the Vacasel Medina adventure?
In the beginning, when I approached the book, I don't believe in art, I don't believe in books. That was the beginning. I begin in going in my bus, having my lunch with my wife, and be with friends. Everything is ephemeral. Everything should disappear. Why to leave something? We become friends. I come back to seduction, determination, to have a belief, to believe that that artist is worthy a lot of effort and a lot of time. You have to believe on it, if not you give up. And for me, Valcárcel is Isidoro is one of my heroes, as a person and as an artist. The more that I knew him, the more than I admire him. He has not ego. He doesn't conceive himself as an artist. He just wants to play with the space, with the colors, with the light. He believes much more in the art as a performance, like Marina does, something that doesn't stay. And that was the exhibition that he did in the Reina Sofia, and that was the book that he, at the end, that Hans had the kindness to come here to present with Isidoro years ago. He said, I want to make a book with the cheapest paper in earth. And the cheapest paper is the paper that here in Spain you go to buy beef, they put it in the wrapping paper, brown paper. I want to do in 38 languages, and I want always the same. I want to recognize the page. And curiously, I have here, and it's coincidence, that William Blake, because I asked Claire and myself to go together for different definition of artist books. And we found one in the 18th and 19th century. And William Blake defines the artist books and the book itself as to experience, as an experience, as a liberated state. But what must aim to mobilize the space on the page. Isidoro did that. When I reread again William Blake this morning, I said, this is what Isidoro did. He mobilized the space in a page. And the protagonist was the page. And this is the one that the text is page 1, page 1, page 1, page 1, page 2, page 2, page 2, each one in each language, in different language. So we have 38 translators, and it's endless. The pages goes in several volumes, but can continue. It's just the page itself that takes the space into it in the cheapest paper in earth, and it's the most beautiful. I will push you to go there and see it. It's exquisite, exquisite. He chose the typography, the design, worked with us as the last detail, but I thought that sometimes I have like a kind of little window with air, was it like a knife in my throat, saying, Elena, Isidoro is not going to do it. Isidoro never will do it. And at the end, he did it. He's, I think, very proud of it. He comes here always to see it again. And from them, he began to do some beautiful books. So the book of the pages has been a detonator, a drive for Isidoro to explore other books, which is extremely satisfactory for all of us in Ivorypress.
No, it's beautiful. It was a real milagro. Now, I see that several students are here and researchers of, artist books and the history of artist books. So I thought it would be interesting to talk a little bit more about the history, because we had great case studies of bookmaking now. But Panofsky once said, the art historian, that we often invent the future with fragments from the past. No, I mean, we stand on the shoulders of giants, and the future is invented with fragments from the past. Now, I wanted to ask you all to tell us a little bit more about examples of the past of artist book publishing. No, publishing initiatives from the past who inspire you. I don't know who wants to start.
Well, I just only say, for me, the first is Goya, and we have here the book of Goya, so you can see it in pages. We have framed it. For me, was the first, and then I would say like Octavio Paz. For me, is Goya and Duchamp are the two major source of inspiration for me and for everything we do in Ivorypress. And of course, from all the labor of Léger, Matisse, Degas is a masterpiece, and mainly for the imagination of the artist and create different kind of universe of colors and shapes. But if I have to find the two drives for me every day, and where I come back, is all the little books that Goya produced, with all the drawings that I saw it in London exhibit many, many years ago, and his first book of the Capriccios, the Tauromachia, all the... Anyway.
So if you could take one book to an island, choose one, that's what you would choose. That's the favorite.
It's like if you, a mother, you say, which baby are you going to take to your island? You always, I think for a publisher, you will take the last one and the one to be. For me, in this moment, the book that I am enjoying more and I touch and look and is the William Kendrick's book. And the baby to come is the Edmund de Waal. Are the two, the ones that I will take to the island to see every day, every morning, every night. And I will dream with the one to be.
And Santiago?
I have a problem. I will probably take too many books to a deserted island, and the island will probably drown. No, I would definitely take Matisse's Jazz, definitely. a book that hasn't been published by ourselves, evidently. But I would also take The Master and Margarita of Bulgakov. And then a book that we actually did, which was meant to have a limited edition, which was The Prophet and the Fly with Francis Alice. That is actually another book that was at the end an unrealized project, because we actually did the trade edition but never the limited edition. I reckon those would be the three books that I would take to a deserted island. With regards to books, artist books that have been historical landmarks, I would complement what Elena has said with possibly what happened with the Dada and the constructivist movement and also the futurists. I think they produce marvelous works, and also marvelous works that are actually affordable books. I mean, books that were meant to be everywhere, and that was one of the utopian dreams. Theo van Dersberger, De Stiegel, and also in terms of the publishing ventures of the past, I wouldn't go to the past, I would actually go to the present, and I would probably do something that it's, I don't know, debatable to a lot of people, but I would actually recognize what very large art publishers are doing in the artist book world, like Taschen, like Phaidon, and also a very special imprint, a very special publisher for me, which is Steidl. And I think those three are actually very interesting.
But they are books, they are not artist books.
Well, but they
call artist books, but they are more coffee books.
Well,
let's find.
I
love Phaidon, Taschen. I am friend of the founders, very close friend. But what they produce is completely different. Is books about art, coffee books, enormous, that you open once and you never open again, because are like books to read, but very, very big. And the materials, the paper, the typography, you see once and you don't see again. You don't want to see again. I think they are great, but it's completely different universe. If you tell me, for instance, the books that one of the publishers that is over there that I saw, Suka, that left now, I would say, but I was saying to Suka that he has a fantastic editor. That yes. That. Excuse me. I will take the sausage.
I was actually seeing a few people
sausage
actually on the back.
to my island. Of course, I will take the sausage to my island, and I will take a lot of books that the publishers at that time, they didn't think to do artist book, that they did something different. It was not a factory. I love factory books. Because if I have to read something, I like, I go and I buy a paperback. But we are talking about artist books and publishers who put in front all of us a lot of effort, a lot of imagination, a lot of investment in time. It's completely, and sometimes it's nothing to be with financial issues. It has to be with time. For instance, talking about Francis Alice. One of the books I will take is the little book that we published of Francis Alice, that he gave us, by the way, the original. The day that the two twin towers blew away, he was in his apartment very close to them. It was so painful that he went away for 2 days, walking around and counting the steps. That was the book. It was with a little it's called I am dyslexic. Publisher dyslexic. The agenda, Moleskine. Not this game. Writing every one of the steps, and he gave us the original of the agenda, and we just did a facsimile and published it in the little artist books that Ansel Kiefer called me one day. I said, I will never do an artist book with you, if you only do books for museums or very rich collectors. You have to do it for everybody. And I will do one of them. And he did the Argonautas. So books that you can buy for 18 euros, for 20 euros, and they are limited editions. And so it's nothing to be coming back to Taschen and Phaidon and you know, with the super investment or no investment of our métier, is to be with the love for offering to the reader or to the receptor something special. Like yesterday that we bought in your booth, here we have one of the best dealers on artist books from Cambridge that she found for me very interesting books that we have in our collection. And you said something very interesting. Norman was looking to a book about architecture, very small, completely from the 60s. And you said something that arrived to my heart. I said, I have this, and I bought it, and I offer because I love the touching, the design, how the love of the anonymous designer of this book about architecture, on how to place the photos, and how to, you know, to choose the typography. That is the love of the publisher. Now,
but I think
factory
large
books,
publishers...
no, thank you very much. Although we have here,
I told you from
we
the
sell
beginning
in
this
our
was going
bookshop.
to be debatable.
Eh?
I told you from the beginning that this would be debatable.
Yeah. Well, you do.
There are large
No,
publishers
no.
have actually invaded, like space invaders coming into our micro world. And I completely agree with what Elena is saying, that at the end, the artist book world is actually craftsmanship. I mean, we are artesanos.
Or just an attitude. Because the little work that we do is an attitude. It's an attitude to do something special, something different, that the artist is involved.
Absolutely.
And create the book, like Jenny Holzer has created this box that you can buy for a few euros with all the archives of tortures in the war. And you are doing a manifesto, a political manifesto, that will stay forever in a very tough way, very free way, and bound these plans of all the tortures, how to do it and how, and the writings. But this is something that certain publishers will never do.
No, absolutely, completely.
Because they have the factory. So. I talk about you now. You just left but come back. Zucker is a great dealer and publisher in New York and has the best collection of Dieter Roth books that I tried to have here, but I never had.
And of course,
The Art of Seduction.
I think about the architecture book, you know, that could be another panel. Because there could be another panel about the importance of the architecture book, because in a similar way, you know, as artist books are essential for art history, you know, the other day when I saw Corbusier retrospectives, the way, the attention he gave to his books is as important, for him that was as important as the buildings in a way, you know, so I think that's a whole other very underrated field which needs to be given more attention is the notion of the architecture books. I wanted to quickly ask Céline and Staffan to answer the question about, you know, the future invented with fragments from the past, but also the island question.
So for me, the history of artist book has started very early. Some of the important books for me are, of course, books by William Blake, because he showed really the necessity for him to associate image and text, and he created the whole book by himself without any self-consciousness. Then, of course, the futurist and the constructivist to Ed Ruscha and Dianita Singh. I'm really very fascinated by all kind of creation, but also I would say the ancient manuscript, because there was this conscience even when the first copyist tried to replicate, because the printing system was not set up. they use actually they added some personal elements and some designs that sometimes went not seen or sometimes were very small, but were the first for me impulse to really elevate the status of the book to an artist book. And there was this wonderful show at the Baudelaire Foundation in Geneva about the medical manuscript from the 16th, 17th century. And there were artist books in reality, because all the drawings and the interdisciplinary encounters with astrologists, doctors, philosophers were for me, so it's a constant state of inspiration.
They were the main inspiration of Francis Bacon in his library.
Yes. And so for me, in an island, it would be too heavy for any boat to transport. So I would keep with my unrealized book in my head.
So I will answer the island question. I think I would just bring novels, and I would maybe bring an artist with whom one could create an amazing, unrealized book with materials that you'll find on the ground.
I think it's the moment to open it up, no, for questions.
3 questions, no? You agree?
Exactly. We can take 3 questions. Jamais 2 sans 3.
If any.
If any. Yeah. Are there questions here? We have questions here. Yes, you have a question in the front row.
I'm quite interested, you haven't mentioned, apart from Selene, Ed Ruscha and his whole practice of self-publishing and the artist book in very simple materials, and how the publishers feel they relate to someone like Ed Ruscha, who absolutely 26 gasoline stations is the complete opening up of a whole new era. And Selene was the only one who mentioned him, but I think he is immensely important in this field. And the whole point that artist book is a volume of space, and I think that's what Ed Ruscha absolutely embraced, coming from the background with typography, making the dimensional space, the volume. But Elena mentioned it doesn't need to be in rich materials. It can be in extremely simple. It's the clarity of the idea within the space. And I'd just like to know how the panel felt about the work of Ed Ruscha.
Thank you. Does anybody want to comment on that?
What do you say?
Ed Ruscha. I think Suka, you have to answer this question. I think he's the greatest to answer the question.
Not that close.
Because all of us know
Closer?
the work, and you can have it here also. You have it here. But I think he's the...
Well, I mean, Ed Ruscha was his own publisher, and when he self-published that 26 gasoline stations and created a book out of cheap materials. I mean, he kind of created the small format and the small photographs, and he signed them. And I think, like, the role of the publisher,
But don't you think that Ed didn't want to do artist books? He never thought that was going to be an artist book, and so difficult and so expensive. I go to you and I see all super expensive. And Ed did it because he was very interested in the role of the car, in the role of the stations, and found it a fantastic space to keep it in a book through photographs.
I mean, I think
That
Ed,
was the beginning of it, because I personally asked him how he began and how he had the idea, no?
It's like when Dieter Roth took the Daily Mirror newspaper and cut it into cubes and put a piece of cheesecloth on it and signed it. That was an artist book. Manzoni signed the woman's body. That was his art piece. And there's a correlation there between something in the book form, something in the female form, and how now I'm really nervous. You know, and how, you know, a book is a portable piece of art. And let's not forget that. And what Elena was trying to say with the Taschen books, those are not portable pieces of art. They're coffee table books. And I think Ed Ruscha is most known, and I feel a book, his work works the best in books, not on canvas, not something you hang on the wall, but something that you covet and you can carry with you. And the only way to communicate the 26 gas stations was in a book form, not in a painting. And even though you have these large lithographs that show the gas stations and the architecture of the gas stations and the time period and the car, you know, he really, you know, to him, the artwork is the book. And that's the change from the livre d'artiste to the artist book, which is the late 50s, early 60s. Dieter Roth, Ed Ruscha, of course, are the most well-known for this act. But, you know, when you're illustrating a text, like Omer, like that Chagall did, or the Daphnis and Chloe that Bonnard did and Chagall did, or Picasso's Gongora, and you know, Mallarmé, Matisse, you know, these guys were like, we're not illustrating text anymore. Now the book is an idea, and that's the artwork. And that's the space we want to be in. It can't be hung on a wall. It can't be, you know, it doesn't sit like a Anselm Kiefer book as a sculpture. It's an object. It's a portable piece of art.
Yeah, portable museum leads us back to Duchamp. But I think it's interesting also, you know, the fact you mentioned Rocher. I mean, first of all, you know, there are so many people we didn't mention because this is an important art history which has not been given the attention it deserves. And so in a way, you know, we can only evoke certain aspects. But I think you're right, Ed Ruscha is absolutely pivotal. And the reason it's so pivotal is also because of the butterfly effect. You know, these little books created, they were a very small print run, and it's very much the butterfly effect. They created so much impact even on other worlds. You know, when for my research on architecture books, you know, of course, Venturi's Scott Brown are very important because learning from Las Vegas, you know, would be a trigger for many, many more books, and was such an influential book. And when I went to interview, we went with Rem Koolhaas to interview Venturi Scott Brown, and I said to Denise and Robert, you know, what gave you the idea for learning from Las Vegas, these amazing photographs? And they said, it's very simple. We saw a book of Ed Ruscha. So, you know, it's not only important for the art.
Or Sophia Cole with Los Angeles.
Yeah, it changed architecture history. It's a butterfly effect. I mean, the other thing is, another person, for example, we didn't mention, who is pivotal for the whole artist book history, is Boetti. No, Alighiero Boetti, The 1,000 Longest Rivers in the World, would be one of my books, you know, of favorite books of all time, because it's about order and disorder. It's also one of the most magical objects. And Boetti, of course, developed a whole oeuvre, which I tried to document in the book last year, you know, on photocopied books. He gathered photocopies in these wonderful red cloth-bound books and developed a whole oeuvre within his oeuvre, you know, with books, which is not enough known. Then, you know, these are, of course, positions from the 60s, which we do know a little bit more about than more recent phenomena. For example, the whole history of the 80s generation artist book has not been written. You know, I mean, extraordinary artist books by Katharina Fritsch, extraordinary artist books by Rosemarie Trockel, extraordinary artist books by Fischli Weiss. It's a whole, you know, there are no catalogs yet on this.
It will be.
Then the 90s, a whole unwritten history of artist book. Rikriti Avanesha has done dozens of amazing artist books. So did, you know, Philippe Pareno, etc., etc. That's a whole, and then it's interesting because we did this research, you know, with Simon Caster called 89+, where we actually mapped the generation of artists born after 89. I mean, Tim Berners-Lee, we spoke about him last night. Elena, you mentioned him, the extraordinary inventor of the World Wide Web, and you know he's not happy where the World Wide Web goes right now because he says, you know, he's very concerned by the loss of, you know, net neutrality, etc. And, you know, Tim Berners-Lee invented the World Wide Web in 89, and now you have a generation of artists coming of age born after 1989. You know, it's the first generation who grew up with the internet. And, you know, what we observed, we mapped 7,000 artists of that generation, and you would think that for these kids who grow up with the internet, maybe artist books are less important. Totally the contrary. The artist book is alive, fanzines, you know, etc., etc. And that's, of course, also history which is not written. So there need to be many, many more panels, there need to be many, many more exhibitions. It's a very neglected field, and it's urgent. Do we have more questions?
And I would just like to mention a fact. Ivorypress published this book of interviews about 10 years ago, a long time, a very long time ago.
I gave it to them when they left, because I thought, wow.
But I would actually seduce you to actually publish one on artist books publishers, which would be very interesting.
This one was years ago. I have the idea, I met and I have the privilege to be friends with very old editors. And I thought, you know, we have to have their voice. What they are telling me, I want that they stay in a page. And they were very, you know, Robert Silvers is here, disappear. George Binderfield is here, disappear. Inge Flalinetti is here, disappear. That was published 4 years ago. And this book is a memory, is a document, is a manifesto of all the greatest publishers of normal, you know,
Of trade publishers.
But it will be good. No, but you do very special books.
That's the
But it's
No, Turner was my adolescent publisher, where I found all the books, mainly French, that at that time in Spain was impossible.
But A Crazy Job is a great book for
Yeah,
those of you who
Crazy
haven't
Job
read
is
it,
good.
because it's a protest
It was
against
done.
forgetting. And then I wanted to ask you,
No,
because
but the
before
other
when
one,
we
yeah, this
prepped,
one.
you mentioned a book I never read. I know Roberto Calasso is a great novelist, but
He's
he
a
of
Bible.
course is also a publisher. And both of you said that that's a very influential book on you. Roberto Calasso, The Art of the Publisher. Can you tell us about that? Because it's interesting in relation to the artist book theme, because obviously artist books are very often, you mentioned Ed Ruscha before, you know, he self-published his early books. So very often the artist is a publisher in the history of artist books. And the interesting thing about Roberto Calasso is that he's a novelist who is a publisher. Can you tell us why this book matters to you?
This book is actually very interesting. It's called The Art of Publisher, and it's actually a book. And it was interesting because of the title of this meeting today. It's actually the art book publishers. So it's actually a game of words. And it's interesting because it's his reflections about building one of the most exquisite and marvelous trade publishers, which is called Adelphi in Italy, which is like, for me, a model of a publishing house. And it's actually his reflections. And you could actually apply what he says in these books, in this book, to the artist book publishing industry. So it is
one of
absolutely marvelous.
Of the books I keep with me in my side bed table. It's a book of inspiration, and you read it all, and you come back again, and you find different things that you can apply to your métier as a publisher, but also as a reader. You became much more sensitive and also critical. Absolutely. With the publishers that perhaps they don't go to the line that you are, but it's a philosophical reflection of how a publisher has to cope with the selection of the books, how to convey the message of that book to many readers, sometimes in a very exquisite way, and keeping all the details from binding and typo, but also in this kind of, in fact, this book is very cheap and extremely rich. Extremely rich.
And then the thing, there's one more thing I actually came to my mind before when you mentioned the idea of the portability. You know, the idea of the portable museum seems interesting, and you know, Duchamp was brought up, Dayanita Singh was brought up. I mean, she's an extraordinary example of an artist who in India and all over the world has founded a portable museum with her photographs, and this museum can go anywhere, it can travel anywhere, and in a way, I remember, Staffan, you at a certain moment also talked about the portable museum. We actually changed the Cahiers. You started to have this box as well. So I think it would be interesting that we talk a little bit more about that, no?
Yes, I think we have 5 minutes. It's already...
Yeah, I promised Elena that it will not be a marathon.
1 hour, 45 minutes, and I think a lot of people want to go to Arco. And this debate is within the program of Arco, and I promised the director of Arco that we will finish here max 12:30, because it was the king and the queen are there, so nobody can enter. But from
So-
now you can.
So 5 minutes. So Staffan,
You-
because of course Duchamp is at the origin, one of the artists at the origin of Cahiers. He was so immersed in there was the idea of the portable museum. When you did the Orozco issue, the idea of it becoming a box suddenly, it becomes in a way, Cahiers is a portable museum.
There is a portable museum. So, for example, with Orozco, which is the last issue of Cahiers, which you can see here at Ivorypress. In each magazine or review, this publication, we have one work of art inside, a lithograph, in the case of Elspeth Kelly, or with Kentridge, or for example with Rosemary Trockle, she wanted to have a self-adhesive plastic that she had printed that could be peeled off and be squeezed into a sculpture. She called it squeezable. And when it came to Gabriel, he wanted to have the glacine paper, which goes around this review, this magazine, to become the artwork. So we printed that as a silk screen, which forced us to make a new box for it, which is now the new packaging for how we transport this seemingly something that is like this, just like a book, but at the end each one is kind of a real art book. And I want to thank at the same time, because I thank Elena and Ivorypress for having invited us here. We have a great little portable box museum or exhibition next door of Cahiers from Calder to Sugimoto, which you can see when you walk out.
I think there could not be a better conclusion. Elena, Selene, Santiago, Staffan, thank you so much. Thank you all for being here.
¿Me puedes conseguir 3?